morning, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop, Developing 9-point source, implementation strategic plans, known as NPS, in Ohio. I am Felicia Graham, and I'm working with the City of Dayton and serve on the Education Committee of the Ohio Stormwater Association. Today's workshop is the second session of a two-part series. And our first session included a detailed overview of the NPS plans. And if you missed it, don't worry. We recorded that and we'll send a link after today's workshop. But before I hand over to our first speaker, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items. So just to orient everyone to our Zoom system, if you'd like to know who is presenting, you will find that in the green bar at the top of your screen. And if you'd like to see who the presenters are in the gallery view, you click gallery view. If you want to share some type of an emoji, you can do that with the reaction button. Or if you'd like to ask a question or you have some comment to make about a particular presentation, click on the chat, and we're going to be monitoring the chat during the 4 presentations for questions. As you all come into the session, you are all muted, and the session will be recorded, so the recording button should be on. And if you need to leave this meeting, you just hit the end button. So just a little information about the Ohio Stormwater Association. The Ohio Stormwater Association is dedicated to advancing the management of stormwater and related natural resources through education, through leadership, and water-based coordination and technical assistance in Ohio. OSWA is not-for-profit and non-political. Just an introduction or reintroduction of our board of directors. The president of OSWA is Mark Mackey with Wallace Tanker Group. The vice president is Kelly Kubander with Strand Associates. The secretary is Regina Collins with the City of Toledo. Bob Lentz with Butler County Stormwater District is the treasurer, and the past president is Kathy Wade Dorman with the Village of Indian Hill. Also, board members include Harry Stark with the City of Aurora, Anna Burns with the Davie Resource Group, Kari Mockenbaugh with MS Consultants, Leslie Schlater with the Metropolitan Sewer District of Greater Cincinnati, John Pryor with ODOT, Dave Reuter with Franklin Soil and Water, and Joe Gearing with the City of Lima. We invite you to become a part of the Ohio Stormwater Association and join a committee. We have 4 working committees. We have the Education Committee, which is putting on this presentation. We also have the Marketing and Membership Committee, Regulatory Committee, and Transportation Committee. In order to join the association, you want to join through the Water Management Association of Ohio and choose stormwater as your area of interest. So our agenda for today, we have 4 case studies that we're going to discuss today. We're going to do 2 of the case studies, take a short 10-minute break, do 2 additional case studies, and then have the question and answers at the end with all of our panelists. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Christina Znidarsic. She has been involved in watershed planning for the past 10 years and has authored or assisted with the development of 2 watershed action plans and over 12 9-point source implementation strategy plans. In addition to watershed planning, she specializes in project management of stream and wetland restoration projects, green infrastructure, inspection and maintenance, NPDES permit compliance, and water quality-based model ordinance development. Christina has a BS in geology from the College of William and Mary and an MS in environmental science from Cleveland State University. She currently lives in Cleveland with her husband and her two very spoiled cats, and serves on the board of directors for Detroit Shoreway Community Development Organization and is a volunteer with Bike Cleveland. So Christina, I will unstop my share.
All right. Thank you,
The floor is all
Felicia.
yours. You're welcome.
Okay. Let's get this party started, y'all. Okay, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Okay, so that should be it. Well, welcome. Thank you again for that introduction. And so my talk, since I'm going first, I wanted to focus on sort of just the overall process of the plan development, and the other folks are going to be drilling deeper into the more individual case studies. So let's go. One thing I do like to do in my talks is have a little icebreaker at the beginning. So this has maybe something to do with watershed planning, but it is a multiple choice. This is also a good test of folks to use the chat function. So what is this a distribution map of? Is it A, a distribution of top maple syrup producers in the state of Ohio? Is it B, Ohio counties with the highest distribution of people named Znidarsic? Is it C, Ohio counties that have more than 10 NPSIS plans in them? Or is it D, a distribution map of people who participated in the 2020 Lake Erie Polar Plunge, which I have had friends who do it and they assure me it is very cold. If you have a guess, please feel free to put it in the chat. I can't actually, I have a hard time seeing chat when I'm in presentation mode, but other folks are monitoring the chat, and we can maybe get some good guesses going here. So it's definitely one of these four. Oh, I can see chats little numbers popping up. That's exciting. Okay, folks are guessing. Oh, look at this. There's a vote. Technology is amazing. All right, so we've got a lot of people thinking C. Okay, starting to slow down a little bit. Okay, we've got 60% voted, 62%. Oh, I really like this. Okay, I'm gonna have to remember this for future Zooms. Okay, looks like we've got enough respondents. All right, so looks like 79. A lot of people are thinking it's C. So I'm gonna end the polling. I think we know what everybody is thinking. Okay. And it's actually B. This is a distribution map of Ohio counties with the highest distribution of people named Znidarsic. Kind of interesting. Little fun fact about my last name is that most folks with my last name live right around me. So that is something that I've always found to be very exciting and interesting, and it's a fun little icebreaker to throw folks. So it is apparently the Cleveland area is home to the largest number of Slovenians outside of Slovenia. So there you go. So let's get to business. You want to do an NPSIS, aka a NPSIS. We're assuming that folks in this talk have already attended the previous one, so they kind of have a rundown of the different components of a plan specifically that Rick and Greg went into at the workshop prior. So I'm not going to go too deep into those details because those have already been discussed. But if you have any additional questions about that, there is a lot of additional information that Ohio EPA has up on their website that has good guidance for that, and I'll be plugging that periodically throughout my talk. But what's step one? Step one. Do you even have one? Good question. So fortunately, there's a map for that. There is, and so you can go here or you can just Google Ohio EPA NPSIS like I always do, and you can find an interactive map that will let you pan and zoom and will show you where current NPSIS or NPSIS equivalent 9-element plans like AMDAT plans or things like that are in the state of Ohio. So if you're interested in doing one, checking to see if there's already one, and you can see there's quite a few in certain areas. Northeast Ohio is particularly robust. Northwest Ohio is getting there. We've got a lot of AMDAT action down here in Southeast. Still a lot to go here. So let's take Yoda's advice. Let's do that, okay, folks? So that's good. All right. NPSIS plans can be thought of as, the way I like to think of this process is two simultaneous processes working together and informing each other. So you have on one hand, you have your technical data, and on the other hand, you have stakeholder and public input. And they definitely work together. They absolutely work together and they inform each other throughout the process. So you need to do a good data check for sure. But if you don't have that stakeholder and public input to help work through that data and inform critical area development, you're not really going to be ending up producing a very robust plan. So each one helps inform the process and is important in producing a good plan. You need a pair to have a good plan. So know your role. So primary roles. The Rock is certainly cooking up some watershed planning today. Plan authors. The entity who is responsible for either writing or stewarding the writing of the NPSIS plan. This is, it doesn't necessarily have to be the person writing the plan. I have authored many plans, but the plan author would be, say, like the municipality who hired me to produce the plan. Example, they would be the plan author. So it's whoever is responsible for writing or stewarding the writing of the NPSIS plan. In some cases, when I used to work with Chagrin River Watershed Partners, we would act as both the plan author and the writer and the steward. So, did it all in-house with the writing and also maintaining the plans in perpetuity within the organization. And then you have your stakeholders. So those are additional entities who can assist with the plan development. Now, authors can be, I've worked with metropolitan planning organizations. I've worked in counties, municipalities, watershed orgs, soil and water conservation districts. All of these folks, park districts, can be plan authors. They can. It's somebody within the watershed with a presence within the watershed, some kind of entity who is capable of doing this process. Stakeholders can also be any of these folks, identifying these stakeholders, but also the general public. So the public should be involved in this process at some point. One of the things that I like to have plan authors do when I start working with them, or if I am one, in the case of when I was with my organization, authors need to start identifying and reaching out to stakeholders early in the plan development process. Developing that list of stakeholders is very important and starting to reach out to them. So you're starting at the ground while you're doing your data dump, while you're doing your data dive, get in there and start identifying and talking to people and getting that process rolling. This is a watershed-wide process, not a solo process. These things can't happen in a vacuum. They're watershed-wide. It takes a watershed. So this comes up, to consult or not to consult. It's not a bad thing to hire a consultant, certainly. I mean, I might be biased there, but it depends on capital and capacity. As the primary author, as the plan author, look at what you're capable of doing, look at what you're capable of producing, look at who you have, look at your strengths, identify gaps, and say, how can we fill those gaps in order to produce this plan? Do we have the technical capacity in-house? Can we do this technical data analysis? Do we understand these technical documents that we're going to have to look at for this plan? Do we have in-house GIS? Can we produce maps? I can say that GIS is really important to a watershed plan process. If you don't have GIS capacity, try to identify a stakeholder who does, or consider hiring a consultant to assist you with that. Consultants can do all of this. They can assist with drafting the plan narrative. They can coordinate and compile stakeholder and public input. They can either be as involved or as little involved as you want. But as a consultant, I insist that it is very important that local involvement be maintained. Do not just hire a consultant and say, do this thing, talk to me when it's done. No. As a consultant, yes, I want to do this thing for you, but it is also my role as a watershed planner consultant to make sure that this process is as robust as possible. I can be a valuable asset in the development and coordination of the local process, but I should not replace the local process. That local process still has to happen. So plan authors should be prepared to be involved in that local process and to identify stakeholders that will be involved in that local process. By the way, I do know everything. I just want to be clear there. Okay, so let's go into stakeholder and public input. Stakeholders are everywhere, everywhere. So you want to form, what I like to do is put together a stakeholder public input plan. Work with the primary author, identify those key stakeholders, not just who might like this plan development, but also think about who possibly might oppose it and get them in your camp soon. Start talking to them, identify their pain points, help them work through this. by the time the plan is ready to go, maybe they'll have turned around, or maybe you can reach a compromise on that. So that's also something to think about. You don't want to necessarily ignore that. That can oftentimes be that can cause issues further down the line. Looking at that background data, I'll talk about the background data sources in a bit, but you want to use that watershed data. You can make materials to identify methods of public communication, stuff like using flyers or things like that. You can make big maps. I like big maps, and I cannot lie. You other watershed planners can't deny. They're great. Back when we could do those public involvement processes with people actually physically in the room, a big map, getting people walk around it, scribbling on it, was just such a great way to get that local knowledge down literally on paper and be able to record it. Nowadays, though, we need to take advantage of you could look at existing meetings that are occurring. You can look at digital technology like what we're doing right now with Zoom, where you do have this capacity of screen share. That can be very valuable to have that visual up for folks to get that public input. The fact that we can record these sessions now is great. We can go back and just have that recording to compile this information from. But I want to stress that this is an important part of the process. Is you need to have these meetings. You need to get these people to the table. For key stakeholders, it can be something like you can call them and have an actual, like just a phone conversation with them about things. I've done that. One of the things that I do is, even if, I usually always like to start with stormwater conservation districts in the planning process as a key stakeholder. They're a critical key stakeholder, and they should always be identified. There's literally one in every county, and you need to be talking to them. And they oftentimes have very valuable data. I've worked with stormwater conservation districts in doing these where they've been able to give me actual monitoring data. Like, they have a robust monitoring program, and they've been able to provide key data. They know where things are more than anyone else in that watershed regarding stuff like erosion and sediment control and things like that. So, very much try to involve your local soil and water conservation district in these things. The other folks you could look at would be like friends of meetings, if there's a local watershed group. One of the ones I worked on out in the Mahoning River, there's a Friends of the Mahoning. They're wonderful folks, and they love to provide feedback and being able to involve them at key points in the process. The other thing that I've done is you take advantage of existing meetings that are already happening that are collaborative in nature. So, for example, when I worked with Eastgate on the the two non-point source plans on the Mahoning River, I worked through Eastgate Regional Council of Governments, and that's an MPO. And so they have like a technical advisory committee. They have different committees that meet regularly, and we were able to utilize those committees as a regular collaboration of stakeholders in the area: mayors, decision makers, council people, engineers, folks coming together to provide input on this subject. So the technical data, show me the data, folks. NPSIS plans are science-based plans. So that means you need to have data. Sources of data include things like previous watershed action plans. Those can be very good sources of prior issues happening in the watershed, or that list of potential projects maybe that you can lift and port over and look and see if they're still viable for the NPSIS plan. Total maximum daily load reports, those are produced by Ohio EPA. Biological and water quality reports, also produced by Ohio EPA. The biannual integrated assessment report, which deals with things like watershed assessment units and large river assessment units. So the watershed assessment units are in this integrated assessment report, and it basically identifies these different WAUs, and it determines whether or not they're in attainment or out of attainment, and if so, why. So a lot of times you're looking at that specifically for data in your NPSIS, because the NPSIS unit, the largest unit that you can go to is a HUC 12, which is oftentimes used as a WA, the smaller WAU. So you can look at these and get good information there. The large river assessment units, that was one that I didn't use often, but I ended up having to use and can be very useful. So if you're just used to looking at these watershed assessment units, don't forget about these large river assessment units. I was able to get good data out of that for the Mahoning, for example, because that is a large river assessment unit. And those are assessed separately in the integrated assessment reports. So I was going in and I was looking for all this data, and I was like, why do I only have data on the tributaries in this particular watershed? Well, it's because the Mahoning is assessed separately as a large river assessment unit. And once I realized that, I was able to go in and pull a lot of great water quality data for that specifically and really help flesh out that part of the plan. You can use monitoring data, either professional level from Ohio EPA or other level 3 data collectors, or it can be citizen science based. Any data is good data. Rick has confirmed that with me. He can confirm later if he wants, but any data is good data. And also, there's no such thing as old data. If it's there, it's data. It was considered good data at some point. It's still good data until other data replaces it. And also, the one thing that people I don't think realize is that data can also be stakeholder and public input. Those are your people in the street. Those are your eyes out there. Those are your boots on the ground. Those are the folks that actually see the watershed and know what's going on. You know, as a consultant, I would come in and I would look at these, and you know, you can do a windshield assessment, but until you really get in and talk with the people and you see what they're seeing and you listen, you're not really going to fully understand what goes on in that watershed, nor should you. And so, you know, again, that robust stakeholder process, that robust public input process is so important to understanding what's truly going on in that watershed. So what I like to do is start with that initial data dive where I go and I pull all of that pre-existing literature. I go and I pull all the TMDLs I can find. I go and I pull all the TSDs I can find. I look at the integrated assessment report and I use that to develop materials for the stakeholder process. Say, like, you can put together a flyer that identifies, these are the causes and sources that have been identified, these are the pollutants that of concern that we're seeing from the literature. And you can use that to help guide that process for folks. And then you use those causes and sources in building your case for attainment. What do we then need to do to bring this back into attainment of water quality standards? So moving on, turning those causes and sources into critical areas. A lot of questions I get when I'm helping people put these plans together is, what all even is a critical area? A critical area, this is a thing that should be informed by both technical data and stakeholder public input. Critical areas are very important. They are critical. I like to think of them as critical issues rather than critical areas, like they address the critical issues that you're seeing in this watershed in these particular locations. So I like to think of the causes as the bad stuff. I like to think of the sources as what's making the bad stuff happen. And then you use that to identify your critical areas. So for an example, your cause identified is sediment. Your source of that sediment is a loss of riparian, aka streamside habitat, that leads to eroding banks. And so you have excessive sediment now going into the waterways, which is causing non-attainment, okay? Now, you know that from the literature, you've seen that reflected in the literature, and then you look at that stakeholder public input and you see people say, oh yes, we've certainly seen, you know, muddy water, we've seen eroding banks, I have photos, I can show you, I can show on the map where this is happening, we definitely think this is a problem. So that's corroborating that data in real time. That's really important, and it really helps build your case. And so, you know, then you can then develop that critical area, and you can say your critical area is riparian corridors, say along the tributary streams in the watershed, because that's where folks are seeing the problems. So the background data is identifying sediment as an issue. It may talk briefly about like potentially where that could be occurring, but it's up to that input process to actually identify where that's actually happening. And that's how you can turn that into projects. Turning critical areas into projects. That is a benefit of robust stakeholder and public input, is that it can definitely streamline the way for your project implementation. You know, if people are with you every step of the way helping to develop these projects, it reduces the potential surprise project issue that kind of comes up where suddenly something is happening and folks are like, wait, what? What's happening here? Whoa, hold the phone. That's why you need to identify folks, and not just always folks that would approve, but folks that might not approve, and get them to the table early on. The more buy-in you get, like potential willing landowners for like voluntary ag programs or something, you know, if you identify this through this public input process, you can maybe start collecting potential landowners for a project as you're putting this plan together, you know, saving a lot of time and effort. Stakeholder buy-in for the project can also lead to implementation assistance, especially where key stakeholders are concerned. Something like, you know, a park district could assist with education and outreach, or a soil and water could assist with education and outreach. folks could, maybe key businesses in the area or industries could even assist with match or something like that, you know, for future projects. I mean, these are all folks you would want to have at the table early on and get them on board with that. So I love being able to get that diverse table of thought. It is so important in these plans, and it can oftentimes lead to unexpected bonuses when it goes to project implementation, where you have some folks saying, oh, by the way, you know, we've got this fund that we happen to use for environmental projects or ecological projects. We could use that to this, you know, and that's a great, I love having surprises like that personally. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about projects coming before plans. That's a thing that happens. Many plans are developed with that initial project in mind, like because you identify a need is typically a thing that somebody wants to do, hence a project is born before a plan is produced to deal with that project. A good NPSIS plan process, however, it can start with an initial project in mind. That's not necessarily a disqualifying thing. Many good plans I've worked on have started with that initial project, but during that plan process, really you should be producing multiple projects off of that plan. They don't necessarily have to be shovel ready, but really they should be identified. You know, maybe on a long term or something like that, but you should be looking through this and thinking about this more than just beyond this one. You need to be thinking beyond just this one project. There's certainly got to be more projects in this watershed to help reach attainment. So, in summary, to quote John Hannibal Smith of the A-Team, I love it when a good plan comes together. Plans are a combination of technical data and stakeholder public input. You cannot have a robust plan without both. Do not ignore the public stakeholder input side, but also make sure that you're looking at the data and you're making good inferences and analysis of the data. I recommend beginning your plan development process by identifying those stakeholders, compiling that background data, and forming that public input plan. Don't just launch into a plan development and then halfway through be like, we need to talk to some folks. You know, get that out there right away. Get that list, start talking to folks, and start developing that public input plan. Checking in with key stakeholders for feedback at several points in the plan development process. You don't necessarily have to have like 10 public meetings per se, but those key stakeholders, kind of your core group, you should be checking in with them at certain points through the process. Or better yet, try to involve them in the process if they're willing and able. If you can involve them more fully in the development process, like say if a local park district has a biologist who's able to contribute some parts of the narrative, contribution of actual data sets like monitoring data from a soil and water conservation district, things like that really help build that plan and make that case. Use that technical data to assist with that stakeholder public input, but also use stakeholder public input to locally drill into the data like I described. So you have that technical data that's kind of telling you that flavor of what's going on in the watershed, but it's that public input and stakeholder process that will really help you drill down into that and say, it's here. We need to do something here. And that will help inform your critical area development. And also, I cannot stress this enough, plans are living documents. If you are thinking about being a plan author, keep in mind these plans are designed to be updated regularly and potentially not just by you. Plan authors should absolutely be willing to commit to stewarding that plan and being open to collaborative updates from multiple stakeholders. And as for other folks who are thinking about updating an already existing plan, definitely reach out to those plan authors. That should be an essential component of any kind of update process to make sure you've got that collaborative buy-in again. Just keep thinking about it takes a watershed. And so with that, I thank you. I think we're going to save the questions for after. I'm going to stop sharing and I think pitch it back to Felicia, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Christina. That was a great presentation. So our next case study is going to be a team study that's going to be presented by Deanna Bobak and Rick Wilson. So just to give you a little introduction to Deanna, Deanna is a project manager for civil and environmental consultants. She serves as the Water Resource and Ecological Services Practice Lead in the Toledo office, as well as the Corporate Steering Committee Chair for CEC Women, which is a group providing thoughtful leadership for the professional development and promotion of women's initiatives. Deanna was among one of the first authors of the NPS in the state, leading in the development of 6 plans in Northwest Ohio for the University of Toledo, the Olander Park System, and other local partners. Since then, she has served as the lead technical author to help soil and water conservation districts and municipalities across Ohio develop an additional 33 approved NPSs and focuses on the objectives and projects to meet both near field and far field goals. Deanna is versed in the use of the agricultural conservation planning framework and Step L modeling within the planning process. And she works hand in hand with clients to build feasible, fundable projects. Deanna is currently serves as the Watersheds Committee Vice Chair for the Toledo Metropolitan Area Council of Governments, and she sits on their NPS Advisory Committee for a 4-county planning area. Deanna is going to be presenting with Rick Wilson, and Rick presented with us last week for our overview. And just as a reminder, Rick has a BS in civil engineering from the Ohio State University. And for the past 13 years, Rick has worked as the lead technical and engineering resource for Ohio EPA's non-point source 319 grant program. He has a 26-year career at Ohio EPA and has had diverse roles as wastewater engineer, site inspector, and senior technical resource and contact within Ohio EPA Division of Surface Water. Rick's duties have included permit compliance and inspections at CAFOs, investigating and responding to manure-related complaints, monitoring of water quality, both ambient and complaint/spill related. Other duties have included TMDL development and implementation assistance relative to livestock and row crop agriculture, education and outreach to farming and livestock operations, industry stakeholders, inland lake organizations, manure applicators, and citizenry, NPDES program inspection and permitting activities, and enforcement and litigation. Rick currently represents Ohio EPA-DSW on several agricultural related boards and committees in Ohio. Rick grew up in Buckris, North Central Ohio, and now lives with his wife and children near downtown Columbus, Ohio, in the city of Grandview Heights. So I will turn it over to Rick and Deanna.
Great, thank you for that introduction. Rick and I will be taking what Christina started off with and kind of delving a little bit into the consultant sponsor role for planning, and really kind of talking about stakeholder outreach, its importance, what that particularly looks like, and then the types of projects that can come out of that stakeholder outreach. Much of the information that we'll be sharing today was provided by Teresa Dirksen from Mercer Soil and Water Conservation District. So having started my NPS writing career on the sponsor side, particularly at a time when there were no plans out there to really fall back on and look at as examples, other than the one example provided by Ohio EPA, I have an appreciation for the amount of effort that is really needed to successfully build these plans as strategic documents for both the short term as well as for the future. So being completely new to the process at the time when NPS first came around, the effort that I found to put a plan together took approximately 6 to 8 weeks of full-time work. It was me who was responsible for all of the drafting, the proofreading, map making, all of the stakeholder outreach and engagement sessions. So looking back at that experience and understanding that most plan sponsors, whether they're soil and water conservation districts, watershed organizations, or municipalities, are usually limited in terms of your personnel and your time resources. So it may be advantageous to contract out some of those NPS planning activities so that you can really focus your time and resources on the most important part of the stakeholder engagement and project development. So you can think about your consultant almost as an extension of you and let them do the heavy lifting on items that they can do efficiently. If you're working with an experienced consultant, they often have the knowledge of the planning process as well as knowledge of common pitfalls along the way, things to avoid, questions to ask, gaps in data, and how to address those. They have easy access to literature. So, and sometimes it's not just publicly available literature, such as the technical support documents and other related reports provided by Ohio EPA and other public agencies. But sometimes they also have access to peer-reviewed articles that can help aid in determining objectives, as well as aid in project development. They can easily make maps. Most consultant firms have access to some of the GIS extensions that are more cost prohibitive for some municipalities and SWCDs. And they also have the ability to assign a team of people to work on multiple components at one time. So that 6 to 8 weeks of 40 hours can really kind of be condensed and spread out across multiple people to shorten that planning time period. So you can use the consultant to really free up your focus on leveraging your internal resources. It's the local sponsor's knowledge that's an important component to the planning process. And it's that local knowledge and those local relationships with both organizational stakeholders and individual landowners, particularly in agricultural settings, that will make this paper plan actually implementable. So things that you may want to consider that your consultant lead if you don't have the internal capacity to efficiently self-perform all of the work that goes into a plan. You would potentially consider components such as measure reviews, data compilation, and summarization, particularly in regards to your first two chapters that represent a condensed characterization of the water. Frequently, this is where I see people get hung up, is they'll spend so much time and investment in gathering every little bit of information related to the watershed that they put their effort here as opposed to the amount of effort needed for chapters 3 and 4, which includes your objective setting, setting critical areas, your stakeholder engagement, your project development. So it's important to understand the basics of your watershed, but you need to recognize that assembling all of this background information is not necessarily the meat and the potatoes of the plan, that you really want to look to the critical areas and outlining steps to address the issues in those critical areas. So other items that are big bang for your buck from consultant help. In areas that are looking at far field nutrient reduction goals, your consultants can help you estimate how much specific practices, specific BMPs will help you towards meeting those goals and help you decide upon an implementation strategy that can help you estimate how much implementation is needed across a watershed. Now, of course, the local sponsor input to this process is crucial, in that as a local sponsor, you know what the landowner's greatest needs are and which practices that may be more easily implemented or accepted over others. Consultants can help you think through how you might engage the public, and they can also help you facilitate outreach sessions. But it's really your role in engagement that extends beyond these sessions. For example, Teresa Dirksen from Mercer County, we worked with her to build 3 plans in the St. Mary's watershed. So she held a public meeting to introduce the concepts of watershed planning, talk about different BMPs, and try to solicit some feedback. Unfortunately, that particular meeting was not well attended. However, if you look at Mercer's plans, they include a great mixture of ag BMP cost share projects, as well as some very site-specific projects, because she really went out beyond that public engagement session. She beat the bushes for projects. She relied upon local knowledge to focus engagement efforts, and she also utilized the agricultural conservation planning framework as model as a conversation starter with others. So in terms of stakeholder outreach, we really need to consider that the outreach efforts and good project development go hand in hand. And this is probably the most important thing that a local NPS sponsor can lead. Consultants can do the desktop work, but it's really the local sponsors' relationships and working ability to interface with others in the watershed that drives good objective setting and good project development, particularly in agricultural settings. So there's multiple ways that this engagement can occur. I personally like to think of engagement in two parts. You have organizational and individual. Typically, your conversations with organizational stakeholders look different than with individual landowners and the general public. Your organizational stakeholders can be looked upon to help lead projects. You can tap into existing partnerships. Perhaps you have an established watershed partnership already, such as the Olentangy Watershed Alliance, or maybe you've started to put together new partnerships as you start to move into this planning process, such as the Cedar Creek Collaborative. Within these existing or newly formed groups, you can often bring together stakeholders that have interests that can overlap. For one example, a plan that I worked on up in Northwest Ohio, we were able to align a county engineer with a local park district to pool resources to accomplish a project that met the needs of both organizations. And prior to those meetings, those two entities may not have talked and realized that they have common needs and common interests in a particular parcel of land. So when we discuss efforts with individual landowners, again, this is where you as an organizational sponsor really, you shine. You have access to those individuals who have sought assistance in the past, but may not necessarily have qualified for programming that was available at the time. You may drive past agricultural fields on a daily basis that you recognize could implement specific practices. You may hear through the grapevine of difficulties that some of your producers are having. You already have access to reaching some of these individuals through existing outreach pathways, including agricultural field days, lunch and learn sessions, annual meetings that your SWCD hosts. You can utilize paper or electronic ways of reaching landowners through surveys distributed at events or through making those types of surveys available on social media and websites. There are also tools that you can use, such as the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework, or ACPF, as you'll hear it referred to later on, that can help guide some of your conversations with landowners, both during the planning process, but also as well into the future. And so I think this is where I'll turn it over to Rick from Ohio EPA, who will discuss the ACPF in a bit more detail, as well as talk about some recently funded projects that came to fruition from the planning process in Mercer County and the funding eligibility that was available.
Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I guess you don't need to see me, which would be great. So you guys probably didn't realize that Deanna and I would be talking today, but Teresa Dirksen was unable to be with us today due to a family crisis. So we'll keep her and her family in our thoughts. But we did, I was able to use some slides that were forwarded to me. So and by the way, thank you so much, Christina Znidarsic and Deanna Bobak, for giving the beginning of the NPS process to up to date to where we are now, from understanding the local needs to the consulting, what consultants can bring to the table. So that was great stuff. So let me get through my part real quick and we can move on to more non-state voices. So next slide. So representing for Teresa, early on, they developed 4 9-element plans for the Grand Lake St. Mary's watershed. 2 of those were funded through, early on Ohio EPA land development funding, and then they pulled out 2 others on their own. I will say the huck nearest to the lake, the light blue, is a watershed assessment unit called Grand Lake St. Mary's, and it includes Grand Lake St. Mary's. And in that plan, there is a drinking water goal for meeting drinking water standards at the intake. So that goes beyond that ALU idea. Next slide. And then more recently, there was funding that came available both through GLRI and through the US EPA's headquarters. One plan, a large huck, Yankee Run, was done by Tetra Tech in 2019. And then 3 others were done using the CEC as a consultant. Next slide. Sorry, I was clicking myself. Thanks. This was mentioned before. What can you use to get that background information? Well, in Mercer County, they used existing plans, county comprehensive plans, watershed plans, the most recent TNBL, which was 27, and Lake Erie studies. There's a lot of background information that went into those initial plans on the south side of the lake. Good. For the Grand Lakes areas, there's a mention about critical area selection. So if you see this map, right, you can't see it real well, but there's a light green section at the north side. That is a wetland type critical area. Then you have the riparian critical areas, which is represented by the light blue to address stream habitat issues. And then for nutrient loading issues and sedimentation issues, the entire watershed, the agricultural, row crop agriculture of the watershed is its own critical area. And then from that, you prioritize accordingly. You can't just have 90% of your land be critical area. You want to prioritize those things. And you can see how they did that. So they knew a lot going into these because of early issues with water quality in Grand Lake and the distressed watershed for the Grand Lake watershed. So they had a lot of background information to meet with farmers. They were able to pull together. They knew what funding opportunities were available through both USDA, NRCS, and Farm Service Agency, and the state of Ohio. So we're able to get a lot of folks on board with planning the types of practices they could implement and beyond. Next slide. And then when they moved north of Grand Lake, outside of the Grand Lake watershed, but into the Lake Erie watershed, there's a little bit less. They didn't have nearly the head start with actions or discussions with the landowners and that. So there's less livestock. They tried some meetings. They did focus on waterways because those were some of the implementable items they could clear the way for right away. They also had a chance to work with the city of Salina on urban areas. You see the urban critical area in the dark cross hashtag maroon, I guess. And then there's a home sewage treatment critical area to address far field nutrient reduction that is contributed from home sewage. Then you have the ag critical area, prioritized ag lands. Next. So these came from Teresa, and quite frankly, the reason why we asked Teresa Dirksen to do this presentation was she had a lot of experience from both exactly with authoring the plan and doing the work to get stakeholders involved, to designs, to managing grants, so all those things. And I tried to be corny in some of these presentations before with pictures like Christina had, and I don't think mine are nearly as funny, but the idea and implementation interface, I think, is something that's going to take off. It's going to be, it's called iCubed. That's my great idea. But this is where things happen, both from the SWCD or stakeholders to potential project implementers and project implementers back and forth. That's where the actions happen. So Teresa's ideas are the objectives are lofty, but projects are achievable. The hardest part is landowner buy-in, so that's where you have to have a good strategy on outreach. What you think is a good project may not work out. And believe me, we've all been there. We've seen opportunities come and go, but keep focus on implementation, and you'll be fine. This is a good one. Farming is hard, and farmers are hard to predict. No doubt there that weather, commodity costs, and other items play a big part in farming decisions. Let farmers think of the ideas. Listen to your stakeholders. and then use load reduction calculations, especially for far field nutrient reduction goals. Use those load reduction calculations to set your objectives. Next. So real quick, the rest of these slides go through some of the projects that have been able to be implemented since the 9-element NPS process has started. Next slide. Since these were started, 319 has funded 4 projects in the Grand Lake St. Mary's watershed. H2 Ohio has funded a 1.5 million for wetland conservation areas coming from NPS plans. GLRI has funded 3 projects, and I'm not sure if it includes another one, but there's a cascading waterways funded through the Great Lakes Commission from GLRI. More for projects in St. Mary's River, grass waterway projects. And so 10 projects since 2008 in this region. Next slide. So before and after of a stream restoration on Beaver Creek, a Grand Lake St. Mary's tributary, channelized, deeply entrenched tributary Beaver Creek. Before and after, before on top, after in the bottom. Next. This is a former dredge relocation area and abandoned, and this is right next to Great Lake St. Mary's. Go for the next one. It was turned into a wetland restoration, a Windy Point wetland restoration. There are also 3 other wetlands that are treating incoming tributary water in Great Lake St. Mary's. One was funded about 6 years ago 2 of them funded from EPA about 6 years ago. Go ahead. Saturated buffers. Mercer County has been a leader in saturated buffer installations. For those who don't know what those are, they're an extra item on a drainage tile, usually at the edge of the field in the conservation buffers that are already input. But basically, it's a leach line to direct drainage water through the riparian zone before it enters the stream. So it's going to further reduce discharge rates and overall volume, and while also providing treatment. Next. And then grass waterways, we're going to get in quite a few of these. Quite a few were recently installed in Mercer County. We actually kind of found a niche with the planning process in that there was a lot of formerly installed grass waterways that had long since expired in their useful life and weren't eligible for re-up in the USDA program. So repairing and modifying and grass waterways has kind of been a good use of structural implementation funding. Go ahead to the next one. There's one that just got installed this year. Go ahead. Another one just installed this past year. Go ahead. And then this is a cool one. This was funded through the Great Lakes Restoration or GLRI with a Great Lakes Commission grant. You see the severely eroded waterway on the left, and then they redid the grass waterway, but they also put a wetland pockets of wetlands within the grass waterway to treat and slow down and minimize the discharge volume during runoff events. So this was the first of 5 that are now in Ohio. This is a pretty cool thing. Go ahead. So specific to a 9-element plan, we were looking, the GLRI subaward came available. Quite frankly, another project that we had funded through GLRI project came in below budget, and we had extra money to spend in 1 year. We mined existing 9-element plans looking for projects that were ready to go, and this one was clear. It was pretty clearly described in the in the 9-element plan that these had been identified. They knew there's gully erosion. These locations fit the projects. They were included as projects 2 and 3 for critical area 3 in the plan. They had identified the landowners. These sites were identified in the agriculture conservation planning framework, and they had already been engineered. Next. So again, this is a description of what was accomplished. Actually, we just got some of these pictures back just the last few weeks. Go ahead, next. Real quick, one or 2 minutes more. You've heard us talk about ACPF, Ag Conservation Planning Framework. If you want to learn more about it, there's a really good interactive, introductory thing from USDA ARS. But why we talk about it is look at these 4 items. This is their main things that these could be for NPS plan development. Facilitates targeted conservation. They support watershed planning. Boom. Enables local level flexibility. Boom. And promotes stakeholder engagement. These are all things we've said are so darn important in the NPS process. So next. I just included one map from an example 9-element plan, these are not a 9-element, from an example Ag Conservation Planning Framework output maps. So this shows a watershed and where grass waterways may be or would be good places to have them according to the GIS data layers that everyone had inputs on. They also provide maps on where controlled drainage would be most useful, where riparian corridors are needed, and other things. So mostly water retention and wetland locating. So the state's interested in this, and we're still making progress, slow progress at that, but we're trying to find a way to make this tool available for to include in the watershed planning process. Next slide. According to Teresa, the ACPF has helped you find a place to start if you're struggling to find projects. It's a conversation starter for the landowner. They're great for inserting into 9-element plans. If you see some of the 9-element plans from this region, you will see a mention of the NIP or the ACPF work. Hard things. These maps aren't perfect. You want to verify that the practice would work in that location. There's still the part with landowners buying in and making the contacts and really bringing them on board for a potential project. There's issues with some of the parameters, and we want to Ohio-fy some of the routine in the way this tool works. So maybe we could change the drainage area for a treatment nutrient wetland to 50 acres or 25 acres, 25 to 1 or something like that. So next. I think that is it. What do we have behind this? You can leave that up for a second. Is there anything more? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope I didn't bore you. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick and Deanna. We are going to take a 10-minute break, and the time is now 11:02. Maybe we'll do an 8-minute break and come back at 11:10. And I want to remind everyone that we're going to do questions we have 2 more case studies, and we're going to take questions afterwards. So if you could put those into the group chat, we're monitoring that chat, and some of those will be answered throughout the presentation, but if there are others that we need to wait until the end, we will do that during our question and answer. So we'll go ahead and get started with our next case study. And our next case study is going to be presented by Nate Schlater. He's with Rural Action Watershed, and he is the program director. He has an associate's degree in fish management and aquaculture from Hocking Technical College and a Bachelor of Science degree in fish and wildlife conservation and management from Rio Grande University. Nate began working for Rural Action in 2008, where he coordinates partnerships, develops projects, and collects data that leads to the preservation and improvement of Ohio's water resources, which is one of our greatest assets. Outside of work, Nate enjoys practicing what rural action preaches by respecting and utilizing the land in a manner that ensures a beautiful and biologically diverse Appalachian Ohio that will be preserved for generations to come. So I will hand it over to Nate.
Yes, thank you. As Felicia said, I am Nate Schlater, and I'm the Watershed Program Director for Rural Action. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about our experience with NPS-IS plan development and implementation. Let's see here. So just kind of an overview of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization, just touch on briefly some of the plans that we've assisted with or are working on. I don't have nearly the experience as Christina or Deanna, so it was wonderful to hear them present and learn about the consultant and detailed side of what they brought to the table. And then I'm going to kind of go over the process of developing the Hamley Run Hawking River NPS-IS plan. So Rural Action, we're a membership-based 501c3 nonprofit. We have several offices throughout Appalachian, Ohio. You can see them with the green stars there on the map. And Appalachian, Ohio is our area of focus, but we do extend our reach outside of there sometimes as, you know, things like watersheds aren't so defined by county boundaries. So our mission is to build a more just economy by developing the region's assets in environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable ways, which kind of all really fits in well with the NPS-IS plan development. And you can kind of see down here what our core work centers on, helping communities, growing local businesses, restoring the environment, and cultivating the next generation. We do all of our work through a variety of programs. And the Watershed program is what I direct and kind of what we're going to focus on the work of today. And, you know, this program really works to preserve and restore our watersheds. We work to build these social networks, you know, be involved with these type of presentations, providing trainings, and also connecting the water quality to economic opportunity and community health, which is, you know, really a big piece of the puzzle that can help to unlock some funding and really make the project more significant. So we've had our hand in a few NPS-IS plans. The Hamley Run Hawking River is the one we're going to discuss a little bit more in detail today, but we've also developed the Wolf Run Tuscarawas River plan. We have the Darling Run Tuscarawas River plan, which is not fully complete, but will be developed and completed in the near future. And that is over in the yellow circle here. And we're assisting civil environmental consultants in Deanna with the Rush Creek headwaters. And then, of course, as Christina pointed out earlier, the blue areas on this map represent asset mine drainage abatement and treatment plans, which are areas that a lot of our work has been happening as well. So I think you guys have kind of heard a little bit about this, and you probably get it because you're sitting here today and want to develop an NPS-IS plan. So the why, you know, these are pretty much taken off the EPA's website, and I really couldn't agree with them more. It's really laying out, you know, a program and showing, hey, the EPA's approved this, they agree with it, this is a solid project. Of course, you know, one of the reasons folks consider them is because they are required to be eligible for 319 funding. You know, really with the EPA approval, with the stakeholder involvement, with all the effort that goes into it, you know, they really do assure that the projects are rooted in the best available science and administratively possible and line up with long-term benefits. And of course, summarizing the causes and sources is really important in watershed planning, identifying those things. And then, as Christina pointed out earlier as well, this is a living document. It's usable, it's publicly available. That's kind of one of the best things about it. You know, somebody else can come along and carry forward projects in an NPS-IS plan that maybe weren't able to be carried forward, or they could build upon it. So it's really an awesome opportunity to encourage partnership or outside assistance, or as things change, for things to get carried forward. So I'm going to discuss the Hamley Run Hawking River plan development that we did in 2017 2018 timeframe, and kind of go through the process a little bit of what it took to complete this plan. And so, a lot of these things, I'm going to lay them out in order, but a lot of them are happening in parallel with each other. It's not necessarily one piece first and then the second. It's more like, all the pieces of the puzzle being manipulated at once. But identifying the problem and need, of course, that's a good starting point. And how you do that can vary. For us, we kind of are approaching this situation from a stakeholder's perspective, as well as from an author and a long-term caretaker of a plan's perspective. So we're really in that mindset. And part of our work has revolved around engaging the community about water resources. And so we actually carried forth a large planning effort in 2015 and 16 to work with the community and identify areas that they thought needed to be preserved or protected or enhanced. And as you can see here, riparian zones and the Hawking River both really stood out, as well as, a few other sites. But those areas stood out with 10% or more of the respondents kind of indicating that they wanted those areas to be protected. So first, that was one indication, as well as this is our backyard of our organization and many of our partners. So we had personal experience in this area and we're aware of some of the problems. And then to kind of back up that personal experience and input from the stakeholders, it's, well, what data is available? And, I've seen some really good lists come across of places to access data. And I think the more the merrier when it comes to this. I think Deanna's point of, not making, getting as much as you can, but not spending your entire life acquiring the data. Also, there's a balance. What's available and usable and accessible. And the TMDL reports and the integrated water quality reports are excellent. Your state agencies and federal agencies, local watershed groups, shapefiles that might be available, definitely other approved NPS-IS plans. They may have a lot of information about the watershed as a whole, even though they were written on a smaller piece of that watershed, like a particular HUC 12. And then watersheddata.com. I haven't seen it mentioned yet, but if you're not familiar with it, you should check it out. There's a lot of good data on there for certain parts of the state. And there's also a good piece of that website called HydroView that can help highlight the TMDL reports in a map form. So really useful and worth looking at. So the stakeholders, I think that this is kind of being drilled in today, and it is a major piece of the puzzle. We all have probably had experience with that local champion, the person in the community who really is like getting things done, knows everybody, bouncing around, things would not be happening without them. Maybe it's some of you, or maybe it's someone you guys know, but, really identifying those people is awesome. And that's a really good thing to do in this process if you're able to do it and lucky enough to do that. And there could be a number of those people around, and finding them, whether they're citizens or working with an organization, really opening that door up to a local connection. If you're coming this from the consultant side of things, and you're not as, living within that community as maybe from the local side or the stakeholder side, really finding that connection to the community is going to be important. And so Soil and Waters, local government, universities, nonprofits, citizens, organizations, I really appreciate the idea of finding the people who may oppose the project as well. And I think that is probably worth identifying. And from my experience with stakeholder outreach, it's important to make the efforts to invite people to the table, but you can also only go so far, and not everybody wants to play. And so you do have to find ways to, get folks playing that maybe don't want to, but also know when, you can't continue making efforts, that path the way you've continued to do it. So, really working with the stakeholders is a really important piece, whether that's through surveys, through meetings. Obviously, things are a little different now that the pandemic is underway, and, we have had some success through virtual outreach in these virtual meetings. And I've seen some really good progress in Rush Creek with Deanna and CEC's leadership, calling stakeholders together virtually. Folks have been committed and showing up and providing good input. So there's still a lot that can be done. Of course, the critical area development for the Hawking River Hamley Run watershed really focused on a few areas. There was a source of acid mine drainage, there was some sediment and erosion problems, and of course a bacteria problem as well. So we were highlighting those areas, and then just breaking one of those areas out a little further, we identified some goals. And so this was relative to some sediment on the main stem of the Hawking River, and the impairment associated with the aquatic life use attainment scores through fish and bug monitoring, as well as the sediment load itself. So you can see that we had identified a few goals, one of which was achieved. So it was important to kind of lay that out there too. Hey, this is a goal. We want this to stay here. It could change. This is a living document. So identifying it as achieved is important, as well as identifying some as not achieved. And so, of course, through the project development side of things, meeting the 9-element criteria is necessary, required, essential, and really useful for inputting that project into a future grant application, especially a 319 grant application. So I think that you know, these criteria are available to you, and I think they've been touched on a little bit here today, but they are important and really kind of come out of the engagement process and the project development and the data review. And you know, you hope that you're starting to identify and address these criteria throughout the entire process of developing the NPS-IS plan. So here's just an example of a project sheet that was included with this. So this is a kind of a summary of the projects that we were proposing in this NPS-IS plan. And you can see that some of them were taken to a different level, more on the short term, 1 to 3 year range. And those projects, pardon me, were actually fleshed out a little bit more within the plan as well, and gone through and shown how they meet all the 9-element criteria. Where the other projects that are more long-term and in development were called out as being potential projects, but were not fleshed out completely in the plan. And it's our hope that in the future, in this living document, that happens as the opportunities arise. So they tie back here to the critical area and to the goals and the objectives and to the, you know, partnerships and all of those things. And so once you've gone through the stakeholder outreach, once you've gathered the data, once you've developed the projects, and you've got an approved NPIS plan, well, then what? It doesn't mean that you're going to get funding. It doesn't mean that your project's going to happen. But it means that there's a lot better chance that all those things are going to happen because you have this plan developed. And it means that there's a way better chance that other people will be able to utilize that plan to get more funding into the area, and that you'll be able to leverage dollars to come into that area. But there's no guarantee on that. So it's important that you're able to kind of take what you've compiled and then put those pieces together even more, you know, piecing the funding and the government and the landowners, and then also being flexible in this process, as there's still a lot of learning that probably will happen taking this project from the plan, and a very thorough plan, I think the NPIS plan is, but taking it from that thorough plan development to taking it to an on-the-ground project, there are still pieces that need to be put together. So it's important to be aware of that, and hopefully you have most of those lined up through the planning process and can do it easily. Funding acquisition, you know, 319 is now accessible. But there are other funds to be aware of. I think that in Rick and Deanna's presentation, they pointed out that there in the Grand Lake St. Mary, there have been funding acquired from a variety of sources, Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, as well as a few other H2 Ohio. I saw a couple other opportunities. So 319 is really an important opportunity and good to keep in mind, but know there's other chances out there to fund your project, and having that NPS-IS plan developed will help you develop a grant application for those other opportunities, will help you show the merit and support from the state perspective on your projects and your plan. So private donations, local governments, fundraising, local foundations, all those things are options for implementing these projects. And then of course, there are barriers no matter what. The Hawking River Hamley Run erosion project, you know, one of the projects that we had listed in that plan, really ran into a barrier at the township level. With landowner support interested in selling a parcel of land, a 15-acre riparian and restoration project, ultimately wasn't supported by the township trustees after, you know, kind of trying to determine funding opportunities. Clean Ohio was an option for us that seemed more fitting than 319. Unfortunately, it did require that township trustee support, which we couldn't get at that moment. So there are barriers, and, you know, landowners being on board is a major barrier. So if you have a landowner on board, you've got a lot going. And I think that it's really possible to navigate most of the other barriers if you have that piece of the puzzle going and just figuring out how to do it. So we've actually included this project in subsequent grant applications and are making, you know, efforts with the information developed in the NPS-IS plan to, you know, loop this into some of the bigger landscape restoration efforts in the region. So it's really opening some doors and hopefully will be implemented in the near future. So just kind of in review, the process is really identifying the problem, finding the data, identifying and engaging the stakeholders, because it's not just identifying them. And then the critical areas in project development and then implementation. And so this pie chart here is just another example of outreach that we've done. These were citizen identified environmental concerns in our region, and 31% identified water quality just flat out as an environmental concern. So you could see that it was high on the list of folks in the area. You know, interestingly, 1% identified coyotes as an environmental concern. We haven't figured out how to address that yet in the NPS-IS plans, but we're looking to do that. So here is my contact information, and as Teresa and Felicia have indicated, questions will be at the end here. So look forward to hearing back from you guys.
Thank you, Nate, for that presentation. And next, we're going to have Amy Mackey with the Raccoon Creek Watershed Coordinator. She's with Raccoon Creek Watershed. She's the coordinator and project manager at the Ohio University Voinovich School. So as she's preparing, I will introduce her. Amy coordinates restoration work in Raccoon Creek Watershed and assists with other environmental projects as needed. She has an associate's degree in wildlife management and natural resource management from Hocking College and a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fish conservation and management from the University of Rio Grande.
All right.
Amy has experience with watershed project planning and maintenance, chemical, physical, and biological monitoring and planning, and facilitating outreach and education events. Amy supervises AmeriCorps members, interns, and students, guides the activities of the local nonprofit group, the Raccoon Creek Partnership, and teaches fish and macroinvertebrate sampling and identification to Hocking College and Ohio University students, both the undergrads and the graduate students. Amy has achieved and maintains Ohio EPA credible data collector status for chemical monitoring, benthic macroinvertebrate sampling, fish sampling, and habitat evaluation. Amy collaborates with landowners, citizens, universities, nonprofit businesses, local, county, state, and federal agencies, and has worked with the Voinovich School since 2007. So Amy, you are up.
All right. Thank you very much. Everybody hear me okay? It's got me. Sorry, I should have made that bio a little shorter. Didn't realize it was quite that long, but all right, I am Amy Mackey. I work primarily with the Raccoon Creek Watershed here at the Ohio University Voinovich School, but in the past few years, we have, like Nate, transitioned into working on a lot of other watershed and environmental programs. Anyone that knows me knows I can't pass up an opportunity to talk a little bit about Raccoon Creek and share some fish pictures. So Just a little about the watershed that we're going to talk about today. Raccoon Creek is a fairly large watershed in Southeast Ohio, almost 700 square miles in parts of 6 counties in Southeast Ohio. The headwaters there is around the Hawking Hills and is a direct tributary to the Ohio River. Just below Gallipolis is where it goes into the Ohio. Our number one issue, and what we've worked on for years and years and years, is acid mine drainage from abandoned pre-law coal mines. So we are that section of Ohio that's been covered under those AMDAT plans for so long, the acid mine drainage abatement and treatment plans. The 9-element plans have come into play as we have completed a lot of those major acid mine drainage projects and are starting to transition into other impairments. To date, we have about 20 completed acid mine drainage projects in Raccoon Creek, funded by an assortment of sources, but a lot of 319 grants, Office of Surface Mining Watershed Cooperative Agreement Program grants, and ODNR Division of Mineral Resources Management. We've seen amazing recovery in Raccoon Creek as a result of these AMD treatments. Over 100 stream miles now meeting or exceeding warm water habitat. On that map, you can see there the blue section, the most downstream 40 miles of Raccoon Creek are now meeting exceptional warm water habitat. Raccoon Creek was extremely impacted by mine drainage. Nobody really anticipated the recovery that we have actually seen. So it's pretty exciting that we're now seeing exceptional warm water down there towards the mouth. So like I said, moving on to some other impairments, we've started looking into faulty home sewage treatment, which is an issue in most of the state, especially down here in the Appalachian region, lack of riparian zone, invasive species, and low-head dams. The project I'm going to talk about today is a low-head dam removal. There are 8 low-head dams in the Raccoon Creek watershed. Some of these dams are already starting to fall apart on their own. Some were made of natural rock shelves and can't be removed. The one we're going to talk about today is just one of those dams located in the headwaters. What is a low-head dam? For folks not familiar, low-head dams are defined by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a dam built across a stream to pass flow from upstream over all or nearly all the width of the dam crest on a continual and uncontrolled basis. Low-head dams provide little storage function. These are not dams that are regulating the flow, that can release flow and control flow. These were typically used to run a grist mill to raise that water level behind the dam for some purpose, but water flows continually over them. So not actually regulating the flow or providing storage. What are some impacts of low-head dams? Most dams in the state are no longer in use. Like I said, a lot of these at one time were used to run grist mills. This one we're going to talk about today was actually a historic acid mine drainage treatment project that did not work. Some impacts of these dams: 3 primary impacts: human safety, ecological, and habitat. A lot of folks have heard about the human safety risks of large low-head dams. You can see in that picture on the left there, that reverse roller effect where the water plunges over the face of the dam, goes straight down to the bottom, comes back up, and is a continual roller effect. That reverse roller can trap people, pets, livestock, logs. A large enough low-head dam is an extremely dangerous structure. Ecological impacts: these dams are an actual wall to fish passage. So fish swimming upstream at low to moderate flow, they're swimming upstream, happily swimming, and they are literally hitting a wall and cannot get upstream. At high flow events, the water might be going over your low-head dam, but at those really high flow flood events, fish tend to hunker down in one spot. They don't really move around a lot because it's hard to feed then, it's hard to get around. So at those high flow events where fish could pass a low-head dam, they're not actually moving around very much. And then a habitat impact. The picture on the right shows a free-flowing river. You'll have a nice riffle run pool development. Then on the left there shows your stream with a low-head dam. Behind your dam, on the upstream side, you're going to have basically a pond or a lake. This is a sluggish lentic habitat. Yes, there are fish that like that. Some of your bass, your bluegill, your more lentic species are going to thrive in that habitat upstream of the dam. But your typical stream species can't survive there even if they do have impact, or even if they are able to pass through that dam. Then downstream of your dam, you'll often see that mid-channel sediment bar. As your water plunges down over the face of that dam and then slows back down, it drops a lot of that sediment out that it was carrying. So you'll see that mid-channel bar downstream of your dam. Big Sandy Run is a tributary to Raccoon Creek in Vinton County in southeast Ohio. It is in the headwaters of Raccoon Creek. You can see the map there with the inset where our huck is that this plan was written for. Big Sandy Run is the water source to Lake Hope. So if any of you have been to Lake Hope State Park or Zaleski State Forest, that's where this watershed is located. That's where the dam was located. Big Sandy Run is designated warm water habitat, but it is not fully meeting that designation. A sampling plan was put together for Big Sandy Run based around the removal of this dam. I didn't include a slide in here because I wanted to focus primarily on the project since everybody else was really covering the sort of background of the 9-element plans. I really wanted to focus on this project, but the way we've selected this Lowhead Dam to start with is a survey went out to all of the landowners in the watershed whose property was adjacent to or the landowner of the Lowhead dams in the Raccoon Creek watershed. And any of the landowners who responded positively to that survey, we evaluated the Lowhead dams on their property to decide which one we were going to pursue. The Sandy Run Lowhead Dam was chosen because as our first Lowhead Dam project, we really wanted to select a small site. Also, Sandy Run Lowhead Dam, as you saw on the previous slide, primarily located in the Lake Hope State Park and Zaleski State Forest. So that was public property, easy to get landowner permission. They were definitely on board with the project. They've been fantastic partners with all of the acid mine drainage work we've done. So they know that we are actively working in the Raccoon Creek watershed and that this would be a good project to enhance the recovery we have seen. So once the Sandy Run site was chosen, we chose 4 sampling sites, 2 upstream and 2 downstream of the dam. On the map there, that little triangle that you see, that is the Sandy Run Lowhead Dam. Then there are 2 sample sites upstream of the dam, 2 sample sites downstream of the dam. We were sampling for fish, habitat, and macroinvertebrates. So I'm not gonna lie, when we decided to select this dam as our first Lowhead Dam removal project, I was definitely on board with the project because the dam was not serving a purpose. It was altering the habitat in a negative way, but I did not anticipate it having the effect on the fish species that we actually realized it had. It's such a small dam. This dam's only about 40 feet across and somewhere between 3 and 5 feet high. But when we did our fish sampling, the table that you see here are the results that we got. The 2 upstream sites, which is your list there on the right, there were only 4 species of fish at those 2 upstream sites. The 2 downstream sites actually had 12 species of fish present. So even in this very small watershed, which is such a small dam, it was having that great of an impact on the biology of the stream. 4 species upstream, 12 species downstream of the dam. Warm water habitat, aquatic life use. Like I said, Big Sandy Run is designated warm water habitat, but it is not attaining that designation. The downstream sections are partially meeting our targets, where the upstream sections are not meeting our targets at all. Sandy Run is a small watershed and there is some acid mine drainage impacting the watershed. This dam was originally installed as an early acid mine drainage treatment project. You'll see a visual of the dam here in a little bit. It's actually 2 concrete structures and they had filled the space between the 2 concrete structures with limestone. hoping that the stream would flow through the limestone, pick up alkalinity, and help treat Sandy Run and Lake Hope. Well, we all know that a stream, especially one named Sandy Run, that is very sandy, first big rain you have is going to fill such a structure with sediment. It became a big sediment trap and did not function for very long at all. So our first step towards meeting these aquatic life use targets would be the removal of the Big Sandy Run Lowhead Dam. What's our first step towards removing the Big Sandy Run Lowhead Dam? Writing a 9-element plan. So even though Raccoon Creek does have approved acid mine drainage abatement and treatment plans, those AMDAT plans that you saw on the map there in Southeast Ohio, since this project is not an acid mine drainage plan, it would not be covered under that AMDAT plan. So we had to write the 9-element plan to cover this project. We had a fantastic student in the environmental studies program here at the Voinovich School who really headed up this project. She wrote the 9-element plan, then she wrote the 319 grant. She was a really huge part of getting this project completed. This was our first 9-element plan that we wrote here at the Voinovich School, the first 9-element plan for Raccoon Creek. The plan was submitted in January of 2018 and was approved by March 2018. We chose the Sandy Run Lowhead Dam as our critical area because we had the landowner support. Zaleski State Forest was extremely supportive of this project and excited to work on it with us. Like I said, they've been great partners all along with our acid mine drainage work. They've seen the recovery that's happening in Raccoon Creek and wanted to be a part of, moving on to the next sources of impairments, these lowhead dams. Also the potential for a positive impact on habitat, fish passage, and public safety. You can see the table there that I just took a little piece out of the 9-element plan. This was our table that showed the causes and sources of non-point source pollution for this critical area. You can see we had 3 main causes: metals and pH, embeddedness, and habitat alteration. The metals and pH source is the natural sandstone geology as well as acid mine drainage. So our geology around here is high in iron naturally. Combine that with the acid mine drainage, you are going to see an elevated level of dissolved metals. Embeddedness, natural and mining causes. Again, it's called Sandy Run for a reason. It is a very sandy stream naturally. Add in the mining impacts in the area, and we do see a significant amount of embeddedness in that stream. And then the habitat alteration, the Lowhead Dam at River Mile 3.25 in Big Sandy Run. So the metals, pH, and embeddedness are definitely issues in that watershed, but since those have natural causes as well as mining related causes, those were not pursued in this first round of projects. The sort of easy low-hanging fruit here in Big Sandy Run is that habitat alteration. This was strictly a man-made structure, would have a direct impact on improving upstream IBI and habitat scores. So that's why this was chosen as our critical area 1. Following the writing of the 9-element plan, once that was approved, we got our 319 grant submitted. This was a pretty small 319 grant. Most of our acid mine drainage projects in Raccoon Creek have been supported by 319 grants, and they're typically fairly large grants because those projects are expensive projects. They're very critical to the recovery of Raccoon Creek, and they cost a lot of money. This was a fairly small 319 grant. The total award was only the total project cost here was only $37,980. The reason we were able to do this project for such a low cost is because we selected this project on Zaleski State Forest, and ODNR Division of Forestry agreed to do the dam removal for us, and that was part of our match for this project. The 319 grant deliverables included the permitting, the construction design and schedule, working with ODNR Division of Forestry, The Lowhead Dam removal and construction site revegetation, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. Also some outreach and educational components, including a tour, some signage, and some brochures. Project partners for this one. Like I said, this was funded by an EPA 319 grant, but our other big partners were the Voinovich School here at Ohio University. We did all of the permitting, the project implementation planning, the outreach and education, grant reporting. Raccoon Creek Partnership is the nonprofit watershed group that we work very closely with. They were responsible for most of the outreach and education. Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry. This was the matching funds for this grant in the form of in-kind services. Their personnel and equipment was used for the actual removal of the dam. They did the bank stabilization, the dredging, the disposal of the dredged material. They also installed our signage for us and helped with the revegetation. So they were a huge partner on this one, and a new partner for us on an actual project. You know, they've been very supportive of all the work that we've done, but we've not done a project that they were directly involved in the construction of. Here's a quick schematic of the Sandy Run Lowhead Dam. It's actually two concrete structures. The one structure was about 25 feet wide, about 3 feet high, and the second structure was about 40 feet wide, and it was actually about 4.5 feet high. The original plan was to remove 50%, the center 50% of each of those concrete structures to allow the water to flow freely through that section. Removal was completed by ODNR Division of Forestry in August of 2019. We originally planned this project for the fall of 2018. If anyone can think back to 2018, which seems like decades ago at this point, we had rain, rain, and more rain. Every time they tried to mobilize to the site, we ended up with high flow flooded conditions, and our permitting required that this project be completed at low flow, and it's just a lot easier to do at low flow. Like I said, 50% of each concrete structure removed. The clean concrete removed from those structures was allowed to be added to the side of that stream channel where the channel had been artificially widened, where that dam was. You know, a channel should not be that wide in a really small headwater stream like that. So the clean concrete that did not contain rebar was allowed to be used to narrow and stabilize the stream banks. Approximately 25%, around 278 cubic yards of the sediment that was accumulated between those two structures and upstream of those structures was removed and placed in an upland location out of the stream channel. Another part of our permit was that all of our equipment was to be operated from the stream banks. Since this was such a small stream channel, we were able to do this entire project without having any equipment in the stream channel. So a few of these are videos. I'm not sure if they're going to play. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, so it'll surprise you and me both. This is Zaleski State Forest personnel working on the removal of some of the sediment before they started removing the dams. The sediment was deposited on site, but in an upland area, and was revegetated at the end of the project. Cutting the concrete structures, concrete saws were used to cut the structure where it was going to be removed. Remember I said we originally planned to remove the center 50% of the structures? To be able to stay out of the stream channel, they actually ended up removing 50% on one side where they could fully reach it with their equipment without getting into the stream channel. And see here they're using concrete saws to cut the concrete before they start doing the removal. Removing 15% of each concrete structure. You can see both structures there. The downstream structure is mostly removed at this point, and the upstream structure you can still see there. This one should be a video. We'll see. There we go. Once they cut the sections, they were able to use the equipment to remove the concrete, and actually worked very quickly. They finished this project primarily in one day. Here's another one where I think they're cutting the second dam. They worked really efficiently. They were excited to work on this project because they could actually see the fish that were downstream of the dam, as they removed these structures, they could see those fish moving upstream. It was instant. The one guy working on this project, I actually went to school with him, went to Hawking College, and we had fish classes together. And he was really excited to see the fish instantly moving from downstream upstream as they removed those structures. This is the project site the same week of the dam removal. This was, I think, about 5 or 6 days post removal. You can see that that stream channel is already starting to form and look a lot more natural. Planting native trees and shrubs on the project site. This was a couple weeks after the project was completed. We planted spicebush, river birch, and sycamore trees, all of which were already established there on the site. You can see on the bank of the project there, that's the area that had to be cleared for their equipment to come in and work on the project. Some of the sediment was deposited towards the road there. You can see a car park. That's actually State Route 278. We planted these trees on that entire disturbed area. A native seed mix was also planted. This is the project site this May in 2020. The site was complete. The project was completed in August of 2019. This was this spring. If the structures weren't still there, you would have never known that there was a dam here. I was very pleased when everything greened up this spring to see how nice this project site looked. This is the upstream section. This is what used to be the big dam pool upstream of that Lowhead Dam. You can see there's already riffles formed there. There's some really great habitat around the bend. There's a nice pool that's developed. It's turned into some really great habitat. Just this really small project. It's been amazing to see the recovery and how fast that stream channel returned to a natural state with the dam removed. Some outreach and education that was completed on this project as part of our 319 grant. We did do a post-construction tour of the site. We did that in cooperation with Lake Hope State Park's annual fall hike. So they had a lot of folks in the area already, and they actually agreed to use their vans and transport folks to the site for us. So that was really great. On the left there, you can see a brochure that was created about the project. This includes a lot of the information that you see on the poster there to the right, with the impacts of Lowhead dams, pre-construction conditions, and a little bit about the project, and some general information about Raccoon Creek. In the center, that sign is located along the Zaleski Backpacking Trail. I bet some of you on this meeting today have hiked the Zaleski Backpacking Trail. This sign is located at King Hollow Road. We've had a lot of folks tell us that they've seen this sign while hiking. You can see in that picture, there's some walking sticks leaned up against the back of the sign. I take that as a good thing. They stopped there and they looked at the sign. And the poster on the right is on display at the Lake Hope State Park Nature Center. So this is some of the outreach and education associated with this project. And with that, I am done. I'm not sure how we're working this, if we're going straight into questions, but I will turn it over to the organizers and stop sharing my screen.
That was great, Amy. Thank you. And to Nate, thank you as well. Those are some great projects and really, really some good visuals and really great to see those on the ground projects. We do have a few questions. I'm going to start with a few of them. If we don't happen to get to your question that you sent in through chat, we will follow up with you via email and try to do our best to answer all of the questions that we received. My first question is, Nate, you had touched on this a bit. It said, what types or tools, methods of stakeholder outreach are proving most effective during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of repeat what I said previously in regards to this, but we have had some success with virtual meetings in terms of the project I'm involved right now with Rush Creek. I've seen new stakeholders completely come together virtually as a group of stakeholders and provide good input, and it's all been done 100% virtual. So surveys are good, whether or not we're in a pandemic or not, at least to get a wide array of input. Those are a couple of my suggestions.
I can jump in too. So I'd like to echo Nate with, the Zoom meetings and things like that is really useful, and taking advantage of that additional technology that Zoom can provide. Things like what we just saw with that survey that just popped up and we were able to do that. Being able to record those sessions is always really nice. I mean, I think honestly, even post-pandemic, I feel like that Zoom virtual meeting concept is still going to be a thing to use. Just as from a consultant standpoint, it's a cost-saving measure. You don't have to worry about driving out to maybe a remote location or something like that, or getting people to a specific spot. Sometimes you might have difficulty with no-shows or something. People might have mobility or accessibility issues. Something like that can really improve the process because it does actually make it more accessible to people, as long as you can, tackle that issue of internet access or things like that. One thing that I've used recently is something called Mentimeter, which is an online real-time survey tool. You can do it through I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but it's really neat. You can kind of just do it through your phone. So people don't need necessarily even a computer. They can just do the survey right on their phone, and then it beams real time to people who are viewing it on the screen, and they can actually see live feedback that way. It's really neat, and it's something that we've used with pretty good success. And the other thing that I've used is also just getting back to basics. Pick up the phone and call people. It doesn't have to be fancy. Using an email blast for communities or things like that. Just being able to get that word out. And then again, the SurveyMonkey is a useful tool because that's something that I've used where I've had communities who might be the plan author, for example, put that on their website. And then you kind of have this rolling survey that they send blasts out every once in a while to drive people to that. And at Chagrin River Watershed Partners, I believe that if it's not still there, it was there for a significant amount of time, kind of just this watershed survey, like see something, say something survey in the watershed, where if anybody was out, they didn't have to call us. They could just go on the website and we had a little tool, a little survey there that they could fill in and be like, I saw this thing. There's this horrible erosion happening. There's a tree that fell in. It's amazing. And so that way we could get that data very granular from folks. And so, just things like that have been very useful for us.
Thank you, Nate, Christina. That was great. Next question we have is from David. He asked if we need access, or it's more of a statement, maybe needing access to all of the data required for the ACPF, which again, that is the Agricultural Conservation Planning Framework. I don't know if this is a question maybe more for Rick, Wilson.
I'll try. So I mentioned this last week. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I mentioned this last week. It's working? I don't see myself. The state and NRCS and land grants have got together in the past to discuss how we're going to move forward with ACPF in the state. It came out of Iowa, or the Ames, Iowa Ag Research Service in Iowa. And they've contracted with University. A similar thing happened with Minnesota. So really it comes down to who can house that system and make that data more available. On a hook by hook individual basis, we can work with the state. We could get you the extra layers that you need most likely. So I guess short term, work with us. Long term, we do want to get this available and up and running for everyone to use. Hopefully it helps.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rick. The next question, it was asked during Amy's presentation. It's from Kyle, and he said, how did you get the Lowhead Dam locations in the watershed?
So Nate talked a little bit about having that local community champion. Everyone has one. We have a really great citizen in the Raccoon Creek watershed, Glenn Stout. Some folks probably know him. He's lived in Raccoon Creek most of his life. He knows the location of all the Lowhead dams. There is also an ODNR site that has most of them on it. So a combination of sources, local folks that knew of these dams, and the state website where the dams are posted.
Great, thank you, Amy. Looks like we've got about one more question. It looks like the other question was addressed. This last question was actually asked during Nate's presentation, but it looks like Nate might have just stepped away for a second. So maybe somebody else could help out. Can a key stakeholder that was not involved in an existing NPS ask the authors to amend their plan to identify critical areas and projects important to that stakeholder?
So can you hear me? This is Rick.
Yep, we can hear you.
I kind of went over this last time, and there was a slide I had on this, and it basically said we want to put something guidance on this, but it involves really when you have a new project that you want to do, and then so you want to contact the authoring entity of the existing 9-element plan and discuss whether or not this fits with the current data, critical areas, goals, and objectives. If it does, great. Work with that entity now and into the future on developing project summaries. If not, relook at the critical areas. Is this project really worth putting in a 9-element plan or not? Does it jibe with the goals and objectives that are there, or do you have to create new ones? So those are all things that have to happen. But yes, the first step is contacting the authors or contacting the state if you can't do that. We'll get you together and start moving forward on updates. These are living documents, and we want these interactions to happen. Thank you.
Great, yeah, thank you. That actually looks like all the questions that we received today. I'm gonna now hand it back over to Felicia for a few concluding remarks.
Okay, thank you. What I would like to do is thank some of our sponsors. The Ohio Stormwater Association Platinum sponsor is Butler County Stormwater District, and we wouldn't be able to have these events without the support of our sponsors. We also want to thank our gold level sponsors. So on our gold level sponsors, we want to thank the City of Dayton Department of Water and also Wessler Engineering. And we also have silver level sponsors. We'd like to thank Stormwater Inspect, Franklin Soil and Water, Palmer Engineering, Sustainable Streams, Strand and Associates, FTC&H, and Davie Resource Group. We have some sponsorship opportunities available if any of you would like to become a sponsor of the Ohio Stormwater Association. If you're interested, please contact either Kathy Wade Dorman, Kelly Kubander, or Bob Lentz. Once again, we invite you to become involved with the Ohio Stormwater Association. We are always looking for volunteers to serve on our various committees. And you can also contact Kathy Dorman regarding your interests. We have an upcoming webinar. It'll be the last one for this year on November 19th. And it's going to be, our topic is Ohio EPA audits. And we will get additional information out to everyone regarding that, that event. And in closing, I want to thank our speakers and our hosts. Our workshop speakers, Christina Znidarsic, Deanna Bobak, Amy Mackey, Nate Schlater, Greg Magid, and also Rick Wilson. And a special thanks to our workshop host, Dana, with the Water Management Association of Ohio. And that is all we have. If there's additional questions or there's some suggestion of a future topic, feel free to get in touch with us and let us know. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for your participation.